Gregory adjusted the knot on his $45 silk tie, the one he'd bought specifically for tonight. It was their 20th wedding anniversary. At 42, he felt the comfortable weight of his life settle on his shoulders. He was an algebra teacher at a public high school in Memphis, earning a steady, if modest, $58,000 a year. He loved the clean logic of equations, the click of understanding in a student's mind. It was a good life, a solid life, or so he had believed until approximately 7 minutes ago. The white tablecloth of the restaurant Circa felt impossibly vast between them. A single perfect rose sat in a thin vase, a $15 gesture he'd arranged with the maitre d'. The air hummed with the quiet clinking of silverware on expensive plates and the low murmur of other people's celebrations. His wife, Patrice, looked magnificent. Her deep brown skin was luminous under the soft, recessed lighting. She wore a deep blue dress, a slinky, form-fitting number he'd never seen before. He'd later learn it was a $1,900 Roland Mouret, a name he couldn't even pronounce. He had just given her his gift, a simple, framed photo collage of their 20 years together. Pictures from their shoestring budget honeymoon in the Smoky Mountains. A snapshot of them painting the living room of their first and only home, a small bungalow in South Memphis. It had cost him $80 for the custom frame and printing. He thought it was heartfelt. Patrice had barely glanced at it before pushing a small, heavy box across the table. Inside was a watch, a Rolex. It gleamed with an almost aggressive light. "For you," she'd said, her voice flat. He knew without asking that the watch was worth more than his 2012 Toyota Camry. He had stared at it speechless. Then he'd looked at her, searching for the woman he had married. The woman who had once cried with joy when he'd surprised her with a $200 refurbished KitchenAid mixer for Christmas. He couldn't find her. In her place was this polished stranger, her nails a perfect glossy red, her expression unreadable. "Patrice, this is too much. How could you afford this?" She had sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated weariness, as if his question was the heaviest burden she had been forced to carry all day. She picked up her wine glass, a $22 per glass Cabernet, and swirled it, watching the deep red liquid coat the sides. "I work hard, Gregory. My bonuses are substantial." She took a delicate sip. "Some of us are ambitious." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He, with his teacher's salary and his simple life, was not. He tried to salvage the evening, to pull them back from the cliff edge. "Well, thank you. It's beautiful." 20 years, Patty. Can you believe it?" She placed the wine glass down with a soft click. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time all night. Her eyes, once warm and full of life, were cold and appraising, like a jeweler inspecting a flawed stone. "No, I can't," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the force of a wrecking ball. "I can't believe I've settled for this long." The floor dropped out from under him. The background noise of the restaurant faded to a dull roar. What are you saying?" She leaned forward slightly, the diamonds in her ears. Another bonus, he presumed, catching the light. "I'm saying this isn't working, this life, you." She gestured vaguely at him, at the space between them, at the 20 years of memories he had so carefully framed. "You were never enough, Gregory, not really. I got comfortable. But I'm done being comfortable, I want more." "You were never enough." The 4 words landed like stones, each one shattering a different part of his world. His pride, his security, his past, his future. He felt the blood drain from his face. He looked down at his hands, resting on the table beside his untouched plate of $48 sea bass. His knuckles were white. He could see the face of his own watch. his reliable $89 Timex, peeking out from under his cuff. It seemed to tick with a mocking rhythm. Not enough, not enough, not enough. He said nothing. He couldn't. There were no words, no equations, no logic that could solve for this. He just sat there, in the ruins of his marriage, a $30,000 Rolex he would never wear sitting between him and the woman who had just declared their entire life a mistake. He swallowed, the motion painful in his dry throat, and simply nodded. Patrice looked away, her expression one of relief, as if she had finally unburdened herself of a tiresome secret. And in that moment, Gregory understood that this wasn't an argument. It was a verdict. And he, somehow, had already lost the trial. He had no idea then, sitting in the expensive silence, that the trial hadn't even begun. And he had no idea what was coming for her. Have you ever felt completely blindsided by someone you trust? Tell us about a time you realized things weren't what they seemed in the comments below. We read every single one. Their life, for the first 15 of their 20 years, had been built on a foundation of shared dreams and a tight budget. They had bought their 1,400 square foot bungalow in South Memphis in 2004 for $95,000, a steal even then. It had good bones, but needed work. Gregory, practical and patient, had done most of it himself. He'd spent a summer tearing out the old, stained carpet and refinishing the original hardwood floors, a project that cost him $600 in rental equipment and materials, but saved them thousands. He'd learned plumbing from YouTube videos to install a new $450 bathroom vanity from Home Depot. He was the one who mowed the lawn every Saturday, who fixed the leaky faucet, who painted the trim. These were not chores. They were acts of service, his quiet way of saying, "I love you." Patrice had been his partner in this. She'd chosen the paint colors, warm yellows and soft blues. She'd planted a garden in their small backyard, filling it with tomatoes and lavender. Their weekends were spent at flea markets, finding a $50 solid oak coffee table and spending hours sanding and staining it together. Their life was a tapestry woven from modest, tangible things. A $20 cast iron skillet that made the best cornbread. A collection of worn-out jazz records from a thrift store. A shared 2002 Honda Accord they drove until it had 200,000 miles on it. He remembered one Saturday years ago. He was on a ladder, cleaning the gutters, and she brought him a glass of sweet tea. Her hair was pulled back in a simple puff, and she was wearing an old, paint-splattered t-shirt. She'd looked up at him, her hand shielding her eyes from the sun, and smiled. "You're a good man, Gregory. My good man." The memory was so clear, so sharp, it felt like a physical ache. The shift had been gradual, almost imperceptible at first. It started around 5 years ago when Patrice was promoted to senior associate at Hollis Realty, a high-end commercial real estate firm in East Memphis. Her boss, Mr. Marcus Hollis, was a local celebrity of sorts, a charismatic, silver-haired man whose face was on billboards all over the city. He drove a black Porsche 911, a car worth more than their entire house. Suddenly, Patrice's wardrobe changed. The $40 dresses from Macy's were replaced by designer labels she'd point out in magazines. "It's about projecting an image, Greg," she'd say, unpacking a shopping bag containing a $2,400 Burberry trench coat. "You have to look the part to get ahead." Then came the late nights. "We're closing a huge deal," she'd text him at 9 p.m. "Hollis is keeping the whole team here. The overtime is insane, though." The overtime certainly seemed to be. Her contributions to their joint account grew, but so did her personal spending. She traded in her half of their shared car for a new white Lexus ES 350, a $43,000 vehicle with a monthly payment that was more than their mortgage. "It's a company car allowance," she explained. though the paperwork he saw was a standard auto loan in her name. Their cozy bungalow started to feel too small for her. Candace from work just bought a place in Germantown, she'd mention over dinner. 5 bedrooms. It has a pool. She'd look around their familiar living room at the oak coffee table they'd refinished together with an expression bordering on disdain. The $1,200 sofa they'd saved for 2 years to buy suddenly looked shabby in her eyes. Gregory tried to keep up. He felt a constant low-grade pressure to be more, to earn more. He took on extra tutoring sessions after school, adding another $400 a month to his income. He suggested they could save up for a bigger down payment on a new house if they were more aggressive. He presented her with a spreadsheet, a neat and logical plan. She had laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. "Oh, Gregory, with your little charts, it's sweet." She had been looking at her phone, scrolling through pictures of a recent work trip to Miami, a trip he wasn't invited on. "Don't worry about it. I've got things handled." The distance between them grew, measured in dollars and brand names. He lived in a world of faculty meetings, parent-teacher conferences, and grading papers at their $300 kitchen table. He wore $60 Dockers and shoes from a discount store. His biggest splurge in a year was a $150 set of noise-canceling headphones to help him concentrate. She lived in a world of closing dinners at 5-star restaurants, of $8,700 Armani suits, of a social circle where people discussed stock portfolios and summer homes in the Hamptons. She started referring to their South Memphis neighborhood as depressing. She complained about the siren noise at night. The same sirens that had been a part of their soundscape for 20 years. He felt like he was losing her, but he couldn't pinpoint how. He blamed her job, the pressure, the culture of excess at Hollis Realty. He told himself it was a phase, that the woman who loved flea markets and home-cooked meals was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of expensive fabric and ambition. He had no idea how wrong he was. The facade of their domestic normalcy was just that, a facade. And the foundation he thought was so solid was nothing but sand, being washed away by a tide of secrets he couldn't even begin to imagine. The cruelty wasn't a single, explosive event. It was a slow poisoning, a daily drip of condescension and dismissal that accumulated in his soul like a toxin. The outrage wasn't loud. It was a quiet, seething thing that built with every casual insult, every dismissive wave of her hand. One Tuesday evening, Gregory was in the kitchen, carefully preparing a salmon dinner. He'd found a recipe online and had gone to a specialty market to buy fresh dill and a good lemon. It was his attempt to bridge the gap, to create a moment of shared pleasure. The salmon, at $18 a pound, was a splurge on his budget. He arranged the plates, garnishing them with a precision he usually reserved for geometric proofs. Patrice walked in at 7:30 p.m., dropping her $3,500 Celine handbag on the floor with a thud. She didn't even look at the table. She went straight to the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of sparkling water. "Smells fishy in here," she said, wrinkling her nose. "I made that salmon you like," Gregory said, his voice hopeful, "with the dill sauce." She turned, finally noticing the carefully set table. She looked at his plate, then back at him. "Oh, I already ate." "You ate?" "Yes, we had a client dinner at Fleming's. I had the filet mignon." She took a long drink of water. "You should have texted me." "I did," he said, his voice quiet. "At 5. I asked what time you'd be home for dinner." She pulled out her phone, a brand new iPhone that had cost $1,200, and glanced at the screen. "Oh yeah, I see it now. Must have missed it. We were celebrating the Henderson deal. Hollis took everyone out." She didn't apologize. She just started walking toward the bedroom. "I'm exhausted. I'm going to take a bath." Gregory stood alone in the kitchen, the scent of the perfectly cooked salmon filling the air. He looked at the two plates, one for him, one for a woman who was no longer there. He slowly took her plate and scraped the $9 piece of fish and the carefully prepared asparagus into the trash can. The waste felt like a physical blow. He ate his own dinner in silence, the food tasteless in his mouth. That was the first time he truly felt the profound depth of her disrespect. The humiliations became more public. A few weeks later, they were at a neighborhood potluck. It was a tradition in their community, a warm, friendly gathering of people who had known each other for years. Gregory brought his famous macaroni and cheese, a recipe passed down from his mother, made with 3 kinds of cheese and a crispy breadcrumb topping. It was a dish that cost about $25 to make and was always the first to disappear. They were standing with their neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a retired postal worker, and his wife. Patrice was, as usual, dramatically overdressed in a silk blouse that probably cost more than the Hendersons' entire monthly grocery budget. Mrs. Henderson took a bite of Gregory's dish. "Oh, Gregory, this is heavenly. You have to give me the recipe one day." Gregory smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "It's my mother's secret." Patrice let out a small, tinkling laugh that sounded completely artificial. "Oh, please. It's just noodles and cheese. Gregory's big contribution to the culinary world?" She turned to Mrs. Henderson, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "He's a simple man. Simple tastes." The air went still. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson exchanged an uncomfortable glance. Gregory felt his face flush with heat. He wanted the ground to open up and swallow him. He saw the pity in his neighbor's eyes, and it was worse than anger. He was the simple algebra teacher, married to a woman who was clearly ashamed of him. He wanted to defend himself, to say something. But what could he say? He just stood there, holding his paper plate, feeling about 2 inches tall. Patrice, oblivious or uncaring, had already moved on, laughing about something with someone else across the yard. The final turn of the screw came a month before their anniversary. It was a Saturday, and the water heater had started making a strange clanging noise. Gregory, ever the pragmatist, spent the morning watching repair videos, and then went to Lowe's, spending $78 on a new thermocouple and pressure relief valve. He spent the afternoon in the cramped, dusty utility closet, meticulously following the instructions. By 4 p.m., covered in sweat and grime, he had fixed it. The house once again had hot water. He felt a surge of pride, the satisfaction of solving a concrete problem. He went to find Patrice to tell her the good news. He found her in the living room, on the phone. Her back was to him. "I know, Marcus, I know," she was saying, her voice low and intimate in a way he hadn't heard in years. "No, he's just puttering around, fixing something. You know how he is." There was a pause. She laughed, a soft, throaty sound. "My little Mr. Fix-It. It's almost cute how he tries to feel useful." He froze in the hallway. Marcus. She was talking to Marcus Hollis, and the way she said his name, it wasn't the way you talk about your boss. "Of course, I'd rather be there," she continued. "In the hot tub, with you." Another pause. "Don't worry, I'll make up an excuse for next weekend. A conference or something. He never questions it." Gregory backed away silently, his heart pounding in his ears. He retreated to the garage, his sanctuary, and sat down hard on an overturned paint can. The smell of oil and sawdust filled his lungs. My little Mr. Fix-It. How he tries to feel useful. The words echoed in his head, each one a fresh wave of humiliation. He wasn't just not enough. He was a joke, an obstacle. A convenient, clueless husband whose primary function was to fix the water heater while she planned liaisons with another man. He sat there for a long time, the grime on his hands forgotten. The sun set, casting long shadows across the garage floor. The rage that had been slowly building inside him for months finally crystallized. It was no longer a vague, formless anger. It was cold, hard, and sharp. It had a name, Marcus Hollis, and it had a target, Patrice. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that something had to be done. He just didn't know what. The path forward was a blank page, an unsolved equation. But for the first time, he felt the stirrings of a new kind of ambition, not for money or status, but for justice. The outrage had finally accumulated enough critical mass to trigger a reaction. The discovery came on a Sunday morning, a week after their disastrous anniversary dinner. It was May 12th, 9:17 a.m. The air in the sanctuary of the First Baptist Church on South Parkway was thick with the scent of old wood, hymnals, and the faint perfume of the older women in the congregation. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting jewel-toned patterns on the floor. Gregory had been coming to this church since he was a boy. It was a place of peace, of certainty. Patrice sat beside him on the hard oak pew, a portrait of serene piety. She wore a cream-colored dress that cost $800 and a matching hat. Her face was a mask of placid devotion as the organist played a prelude. To anyone watching, they were the picture of a respectable, long-married couple. But Gregory felt a chasm between them, wider and deeper than the Grand Canyon. Since her declaration that he was never enough, a glacial silence had descended upon their home. They moved around each other like ghosts, the air crackling with unspoken words. He was pretending that he was considering her words, that he was hurt but willing to talk. In reality, he was observing, watching her with a new, terrifying clarity. He noticed the way her thumb constantly swiped at the screen of her phone, the secretive smiles that would flicker across her face when a notification popped up. The choir began to sing, their voices rising in a powerful wave of gospel harmony. As the congregation rose to its feet, Patrice shifted, pulling her Bible from her large, expensive purse. The purse, a $2,800 Givenchy, was unzipped. As she lifted the heavy, leather-bound book, a small, thick envelope slipped out, unseen by her. It fluttered silently and landed face down on the dark wood of the pew at Gregory's feet. He saw it immediately. It was a high-quality, cream-colored card, the kind used for special occasions. He stared at it for a moment as they sang the first verse of Amazing Grace. Patrice was lost in the performance of worship, her eyes closed, her head tilted slightly. She hadn't noticed. Gregory's heart began to pound, a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He felt a cold dread, mixed with a grim, undeniable curiosity. Bending down slightly, as if to adjust his shoe, his hand closed around the card. The cardstock was thick and glossy, expensive to the touch. He slipped it into the pocket of his suit jacket, his movements fluid and economical. No one saw. For the rest of the service, he was a statue. He stood when others stood, sat when they sat. He heard the pastor's sermon about forgiveness and grace as if from a great distance. The words were just sounds, meaningless vibrations in the air. The only thing that felt real was the stiff rectangle of cardboard pressing against his chest. It felt as heavy as a tombstone. When the service ended at 10:32 a.m., he followed Patrice out into the bright Memphis sun. People greeted them, shaking their hands, telling Patrice how beautiful she looked. "Brother Gregory, Sister Patrice, good to see you?" He smiled and nodded, a perfect automaton of politeness. His mind was a maelstrom. He waited until they were in the car, his 2012 Camry with its faint scent of old books and chalk dust. Patrice was immediately on her phone, texting furiously. "I'm going to run by the office for a bit," she said, not looking up. Hollis needs me to prep some documents for Monday. On a Sunday? Gregory asked, his voice perfectly level. It's a 7-figure deal, Gregory. The commission alone will be more than your yearly salary. Some people have to work for a living. He didn't respond. He just drove. He dropped her at the gleaming glass tower of the Hollis Realty building in East Memphis. He watched her walk through the automatic doors, a confident swing in her step. She didn't look back. He drove not home but to a small park a few blocks away. He parked under the shade of a large oak tree and turned off the engine. The silence was absolute. For a full minute, he just sat there, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Then, with trembling fingers, he pulled the card from his pocket. The envelope was unsealed. It was addressed in a bold, masculine script. To P. He slid the card out. It was a photograph card. The picture on the front was of a man and a woman, laughing on a boat. The man was Marcus Hollis, his arm wrapped possessively around Patrice. She was wearing a bikini, leaning into him, her face radiant with a kind of joy Gregory hadn't seen in a decade. Behind them was a backdrop of sparkling blue water and a coastline that was definitely not in Tennessee. He felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. His vision swam. It was one thing to suspect, to hear a snippet of a phone call. It was another to see it. Irrefutable. Glossy. Full-color proof. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely read the inscription inside. The same bold handwriting. My dearest P, happy anniversary. 20 years with him, but 20 years of you in my life. You are the most brilliant, beautiful, and ambitious woman I have ever known. These last 2 decades have been the greatest adventure. Thank you for every stolen weekend, every late night at the office, every moment that has been ours and ours alone. He will never know the real you, but I do, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you have everything you deserve. This year's anniversary bonus is just a small token. The real prize is coming soon. Our prize. Forever yours. Monsieur Gregory read it once, twice, a third time. The words burned themselves into his brain. 20 years, not 5, 20. Their entire marriage had been a lie. His whole adult life was a sham. The woman he had built a home with, the life he had poured his heart and soul into, it was all a cover story for her real life. A life lived with another man. The bonuses. The overtime. It was money from her lover, payment for her time. He leaned his head back against the seat, the cheap fabric rough against his skin. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a hot path down his cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure, incandescent rage. The world that had been fracturing for months finally shattered completely. And in the silent, sun-dappled car, surrounded by the wreckage of his life, a new kind of clarity emerged. The quiet, methodical mind of the algebra teacher began to turn. This was no longer a personal problem. It was a mathematical one, an equation of betrayal that demanded to be solved. And he would find the variable that would make it all balance. He would be patient, he would be meticulous, and he would be devastating. The 6 weeks that followed were the longest, most excruciating performance of Gregory's life. He became a master of duplicity, a silent actor in the tragicomedy of his own marriage. Every morning he woke up, said, "Good morning, honey," and made coffee just as he had for 20 years. But now the words felt like ash in his mouth. He was living with the enemy, and she had no idea he had breached her defenses. This was P4. Strategic restraint. He took the damning anniversary card and placed it in a fireproof safe he bought for $150 at Walmart, hidden in the back of his closet beneath a stack of old yearbooks. That card was the cornerstone of the case he was building in his mind. His first act of quiet rebellion was to start a journal, not a diary of feelings, but a ledger of lies. He bought a simple, black moleskin notebook for $19.95. Each day, he documented Patrice's comings and goings with the precision of a scientist. May 14th. Patrice left at 7:15 a.m., said she had an early meeting, returned at 9:45 p.m., said they were whining and dining a client from Atlanta. I found a receipt in her coat pocket from a jewelry store in Germantown, a purchase for $4,200. She was wearing new diamond earrings the next day, May 22nd. Patrice announced a mandatory weekend real estate conference in Destin, Florida. Flight and hotel paid by the company, she said. I checked the Hollis Realty corporate site. No conference was listed. I paid $49.99 for a background search service and found a flight manifest. 2 tickets to Destin, booked on Hollis's personal American Express, M. Hollis and P. Evans. He had to interact with her to play his part. The weekend she left for her conference, he helped her pack. He watched her fold a new $300 swimsuit into her suitcase. Hope you learn a lot, he said, his voice a perfect blend of supportive and slightly wistful. Wish I could be on a beach right now. You know how it is, Greg. All work, she replied, not meeting his eye. But the per diem is great. While she was gone, he did not mope. He acted. He called his mother. His mom, a retired bookkeeper named Gloria, was a woman of formidable organizational skills. She lived in the same small house she'd raised him in, a space filled with neatly labeled photo albums and organized files. Mama, he said over the phone, I need your help. It's about Patrice. He drove to her house that Saturday. Over a cup of her strong chicory coffee, he told her everything. He left out the rawest emotional details, framing it as a financial problem. He showed her a photocopy of the card. Gloria, a proud, sharp-witted black woman with a no-nonsense attitude, read it without a word. Her lips thinned into a hard line. She didn't offer platitudes or hugs. She offered something far better, action. That no-good man, she said, her voice low and dangerous. And her, right along with him, 20 years. She stood up. Gregory, you come with me. She led him to her spare bedroom, which served as her immaculate office. From a large filing cabinet, she pulled out a heavy, perfectly organized accordion file. Then another, and another. I told you it pays to keep records, she said, her voice softening slightly. Your father, God rest his soul, always said, the paper trail never lies. Inside were copies of every joint tax return he and Patrice had filed since 2004. Attached to each one were their W-2s and his pay stubs, which he had always given her to file. Patrice had handled their taxes, always claiming it was too complicated for him. For the last 5 years, she'd used a high-priced CPA firm recommended by Hollis. She told me her income was all on the W-2, Gregory said, looking at the documents. Let's see about that, Gloria said, her eyes gleaming with a warrior's light. They spent the entire weekend at her dining room table, Gregory with his mathematical mind, and Gloria with her bookkeeper's intuition. They cross-referenced Patrice's declared income on their tax returns with the deposits into their joint account and her known spending. The numbers didn't add up, not even close. There were tens of thousands of dollars unaccounted for each year. Large, lump-sum deposits labeled miscellaneous bonus that far exceeded what a senior associate, even a successful one, would reasonably earn. He found a statement from a separate savings account Patrice had opened 5 years ago. He'd found the paperwork by searching her desk while she was in the shower. The balance was over $250,000. It was all funded by direct deposits from a corporate entity he didn't recognize, MH Enterprises, LLC. A quick search revealed it was a holding company. The sole proprietor, Marcus Hollis. These weren't bonuses. This was off-the-books payment. The hardest part was facing Patrice each day, One evening, she came home giddy, twirling in the living room. She was wearing a new watch, a Cartier that he later found was worth $7,500. "Another big closing," she announced. "Hollis is so generous. He gave all the senior staff a performance award." Gregory looked at the watch on her wrist, then at his ledger of lies hidden in his desk. He forced a smile. "That's wonderful, honey. You deserve it. You work so hard." The lie almost choked him. He felt like a spy in his own life. The love he once felt had been replaced by a cold, calculating fury. He was no longer a husband. He was a prosecutor, gathering evidence for a trial only he knew was coming. He was living a double life, just as she had for 2 decades. The difference was, his was temporary, and it had a purpose. He had made a critical mistake in trusting her for 20 years. He would not make another. The following Monday, June 10th, Gregory took a personal day. He told the school secretary he had a dental emergency. At 10 a.m., he found himself in a sleek, intimidatingly modern office in downtown Memphis. The name on the door was Miller and Associates, Forensic Accounting and Legal Services. He had been referred by a colleague whose cousin had gone through a complicated high-asset divorce. He sat across a large mahogany desk from a man named David Miller. Miller was a sharp, impeccably dressed black man in his late 50s, with a reputation for being a shark. He was both a CPA and a lawyer. His billing rate was $750 an hour. Gregory was nervous. He wore his best suit, the one he saved for funerals and parent-teacher nights, a simple gray suit that had cost him $250. He felt out of place amidst the expensive art and panoramic views of the Mississippi River. He carried a worn leather briefcase that had belonged to his father. Inside was his meticulously compiled evidence. "Mr. Evans," Miller began, his voice smooth and professional, "your colleague spoke highly of you, said you were a man of integrity. Tell me what's going on." For the next hour, Gregory laid it all out. He spoke with the calm, methodical precision of an algebra teacher explaining a complex proof. He didn't focus on the heartbreak. He focused on the numbers. He presented the journal, the bank statements, the list of luxury purchases with their dollar-tagged values, the flight manifest to Destin. He laid out the tax returns from the past 5 years next to the printouts of the deposits from MH Enterprises, LLC. Finally, he placed the photocopy of the anniversary card on the desk. Miller picked it up and read it. His professional demeanor didn't change, but Gregory saw a flicker of something in his eyes. He read it again, then placed it carefully back on the desk. He was silent for a long moment, looking at the mountain of paper. "Mr. Evans," he said, his voice now carrying a new weight, "this is not just an affair. This is a conspiracy to commit tax fraud, layered on top of a clear case for alienation of affection." Gregory nodded. "That's what I thought." "The payments from Hollis's LLC, disguised as bonuses, are classic tax evasion," Miller explained, his fingers steepled. "He's paying her with untaxed corporate funds, and she's not declaring it as income. This is not a small matter. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars over 5 years, maybe more. The IRS takes a very dim view of this sort of arrangement." He leaned forward. "You have 2 powerful legal avenues here. First, the alienation of affection lawsuit against Mr. Hollis. Tennessee is one of the few states where you can sue a third party for the destruction of your marriage. Given this card," he tapped it with his finger, "and the financial evidence of their long-term affair, your case is exceptionally strong. We can sue for compensatory and punitive damages." "And the second?" Gregory asked. A slow, grim smile spread across David Miller's face. "The second is where we hit them where they truly live. The IRS has a whistleblower program. An individual who provides specific and credible information about tax fraud can receive a portion of the unpaid taxes, penalties, and interest that the IRS recovers, between 15 and 30%. Gregory's mind, always quick with numbers, started calculating. If Patrice had hidden, say, $500,000 over 5 years, the back taxes, penalties, and interest could easily approach that same amount. A percentage of that would be substantial. We would file a Form 211, application for award for original information, Miller continued. We submit your evidence, the bank statements, the LLC records, a detailed narrative. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division will open a case. An audit of this magnitude on a high-profile individual like Marcus Hollis will be catastrophic for him. It will uncover everything, every shell company, every hidden account. What about my wife? Gregory asked, the word wife tasting like poison. She's party to the fraud, so she'll be liable for her share of the back taxes and penalties. When the IRS starts looking, they don't stop. They'll audit their joint returns. Since you signed them, you could be held liable too. However, Miller raised a hand, given that you are the whistleblower and can prove you were deliberately misled about her income, we can file for innocent spouse relief. You'll be protected. She will not. The sheer, beautiful, destructive logic of it was breathtaking. It was an elegant solution to a messy human problem. Justice, delivered not by rage and shouting, but by paperwork and federal statutes. The alienation of affection suit will be filed publicly, Miller said. It will become a matter of public record. His reputation, his business, his own marriage, it will all be jeopardized. The IRS investigation will be the financial kill shot. They will be fighting a war on two fronts. Gregory looked at Miller. How much to retain you? My retainer for a case this complex is $25,000, Miller said without flinching. Gregory's heart sank. It was half his yearly salary. I don't have that kind of money. Miller studied him for a moment. He looked down at the evidence, at the neat handwriting in the journal, the organized files. He looked at Gregory's earnest, determined face. Mr. Evans, he said finally, normally I don't do this, but this is an egregious case. The evidence is pristine, and frankly, these people offend my sensibilities. He leaned back in his $4,000 Herman Miller chair. We'll work on contingency for the alienation of affection suit. I'll take 40% of the final settlement or judgment. For the IRS matter, the government pays the award, so there's no fee to you there. I just need a $5,000 deposit to cover initial filing fees and expenses. Can you manage that? Gregory thought of the small emergency fund he'd painstakingly built, the money he'd saved from his tutoring gigs. It was almost exactly $5,000. It was everything he had. Yes, Gregory said, his voice firm. I can manage that. He walked out of the law office an hour later into the bright afternoon sun. He felt lighter than he had in months. He had a plan. A precise, strategic, and devastating plan. Patrice and her lover had underestimated him. They saw a simple algebra teacher. They were about to learn a lesson about consequences. They had no idea what was coming. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received when facing a tough situation? Share your wisdom in the comments. It might just help someone else going through a hard time. The strike was scheduled for Tuesday, June 25th at 10:30 a.m. David Miller had choreographed it with the precision of a military operation. It was a two-pronged attack designed for maximum chaos and psychological impact. At 10:29 a.m., Gregory was sitting in his classroom during his planning period. The room was empty, the desks neatly aligned. The air smelled of dry erase markers and teenage apathy. He stared at the poster on his wall. Mathematics is the language with which God has written the universe. He had always believed in order, in logic, in a universe where things eventually made sense. Today was the day he would impose order on the chaos of his own life. His phone was on his desk, silent. He was waiting. At precisely 10:30 a.m., in a downtown federal building, an associate from Miller's firm hand-delivered the thick whistleblower packet, Form 211 and over 200 pages of supporting evidence, to the IRS Criminal Investigation Intake Office. The file was stamped, logged, and a case number was generated. The gears of the federal government began to grind, slow and inexorable. Simultaneously, 2 miles away in the gleaming glass and steel temple of East Memphis Commerce, a process server named Frank, a burly man in a nondescript polo shirt, walked into the lobby of Hollis Realty. The lobby was a symphony of beige marble, expensive leather, and hushed ambition. A receptionist sat behind a massive curved desk. "I'm here to see Marcus Hollis," Frank said, his voice pleasant. "I have a delivery for him." "Do you have an appointment?" the receptionist asked, her tone implying he clearly did not belong here. "He's expecting me," Frank lied smoothly. She buzzed Hollis's executive assistant. A moment later, the assistant, a young woman in a sharp blazer, appeared. "Mr. Hollis is in a meeting. Can I help you?" "This is for him personally," Frank said, holding up a large manila envelope. The assistant's eyes narrowed. "I can take it for him?" "My instructions are to deliver it to him directly. It's urgent." Sensing a potential scene, the assistant sighed and led Frank down a long, silent hallway carpeted in a plush gray wool that probably cost $100 a square yard. She knocked softly on a pair of massive oak doors. "Mr. Hollis, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a man here with an urgent personal delivery." The door opened a crack. Marcus Hollis himself stood there, annoyance etched on his handsome tanned face. He was wearing an $8,000 Brioni suit. "What is it?" he snapped. "Marcus Hollis?" Frank asked. "Yes. What is this about?" "You've been served," Frank said, and with a practiced motion, he thrust the envelope into Hollis's chest. Hollis instinctively took it. Inside was the summons and complaint for the alienation of affection lawsuit filed by Gregory Evans. The first page detailed the plaintiff, the defendant, and the demand, $2 million in compensatory damages, and $5 million in punitive damages. Hollis's face, which a moment before had been a mask of arrogant impatience, went completely white. He stared at the document as if it were a snake. The color drained from his cheeks. His mouth opened slightly. What is this?" he stammered. "Have a nice day," Frank said, turning and walking away, leaving Hollis standing in the doorway, his world beginning to crumble. At that exact moment, a second process server, a woman named Maria, walked into the main bullpen of Hollis Realty. It was a large, open-plan office where the associates worked. Patrice was at her desk, laughing on the phone with a client. She looked powerful and confident in a red power suit, her desk positioned near a window with a commanding view. Maria walked directly to her desk. "Patrice Evans?" Patrice looked up, her smile fading. "Yes?" "You've been served," Maria said, placing an identical envelope on her desk, though this one contained a copy of the lawsuit naming her as a co-conspirator in the affair and a formal notice of legal separation filed by Gregory that morning, which immediately froze 50% of all their known joint assets pending divorce proceedings. Patrice stared at the envelope, then at Maria, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "This is a joke, right?" Maria just gave her a polite, professional smile and walked away. Patrice's hands trembled as she tore open the envelope. Her colleagues began to murmur. Their curiosity piqued. She read the first page. Her eyes widened in horror. She saw Gregory's name. She saw Marcus Hollis's name. She saw the words alienation of affection, adultery, 20-year affair. She saw the dollar amounts. $7 million. A sound escaped her throat. A small, strangled gasp. The entire office went silent. Everyone was looking at her. Her face, which had been glowing with success moments before, was now a ghastly shade of pale. Her carefully constructed world of prestige and power was imploding in public. She snatched her $3,500 Celine bag and stood up so abruptly her chair rolled back and hit the credenza behind her. She ran, half stumbling, toward the hallway that led to Hollis's office, the legal papers clutched in her hand. Back in his quiet classroom, Gregory's phone buzzed at 10:37 a.m. It was a text from David Miller. "Eagles have landed, both targets served. Stand by." Gregory took a deep breath. He felt a profound, chilling calm. The equation was in motion. The variables were locked in. All that was left was to watch the solution unfold. He picked up a dry erase marker and began writing a quadratic formula on the board. For the first time in months, his hand was perfectly steady. The controlled, logical beauty of the math was a soothing balm. He was back in his element. He was in control. The lesson was about to begin. The collapse was not a single explosion, but a cascading series of detonations, each one triggered by the one before it. The fallout from Gregory's quiet, meticulous strike was swift and brutal. David Miller called it the consequences cascade, and he narrated the initial events to Gregory over the phone, with the grim satisfaction of a master strategist watching his plan unfold perfectly. Consequence number 1, the panic. The first wave was pure, unadulterated panic. At 10:41 a.m., just 4 minutes after being served, Patrice burst into Marcus Hollis's office without knocking. He was frantically on the phone, presumably with his own high-priced lawyer. He hung up abruptly when he saw her. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, waving the lawsuit papers. Her voice, usually so controlled and condescending, was high and ragged. "He knows. Gregory knows everything." "Calm down," Hollis snapped, his own face pale and beaded with sweat. "Don't make a scene." "Don't make a scene," she yelled, the sound echoing down the silent, carpeted hallway. "My life is falling apart. Our lives. That little man is suing you for $7 million. He can't prove anything," Hollis blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. "He can't?" Patrice's laugh was hysterical. She threw a copy of the anniversary card, which Miller had thoughtfully included as Exhibit A in the filing, onto his desk. "What do you call this, Marcus? He has the card. The one from the boat. How could he have gotten it?" Hollis stared at the picture of them, his arm around her, their carefree smiles now looking like grotesque masks of stupidity. He had no answer. The trap had been sprung, and they were caught in it. Consequence number 2, the financial freeze. The legal notice of separation Gregory had filed had an immediate, tangible effect. When Patrice, in a blind panic, tried to transfer the $250,000 from her secret savings account into another, more hidden one, the transaction was denied. The account, funded by MH Enterprises, LLC, was now directly linked to the lawsuit as a potential asset. A legal hold had been placed on it. Her secret nest egg, the money that made her feel superior and secure, was gone. She called the bank, yelling at a junior customer service representative, who calmly informed her that a court order had frozen the funds pending a full financial disclosure. The $250,000 was now a digital ghost, visible but untouchable. Consequence number 3, the professional implosion. By noon, the lawsuit was public record. A clerk in the courthouse, who happened to be the cousin of a reporter at a local Memphis business journal, made a phone call. By 3 p.m., the story was the lead item on the journal's website. Prominent real estate mogul Marcus Hollis sued for $7 million in alienation of affection suit, alleging 20-year affair with employee. The fallout at Hollis Realty was instantaneous. The phones began ringing off the hook, not with clients, but with reporters. Hollis, a man who meticulously curated his public image as a family man and business leader, was exposed as a common adulterer. His partners, who were named as co-owners of the firm but were not implicated in the lawsuit, called an emergency meeting. They were furious. The firm's reputation was being dragged through the mud. At 5 p.m., Patrice was called into a conference room with the firm's partners and an HR representative. She was fired, effective immediately, for gross misconduct and behavior detrimental to the company's reputation. She was handed a box and told to clear out her desk. In the space of 7 hours, she had gone from a high-flying senior associate to an unemployed woman being escorted out of the building by security, her colleagues staring at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. Her career, built over 2 decades, was incinerated. Consequence number 4, the marital Armageddon. Marcus Hollis had his own domestic apocalypse to face. His wife, a formidable woman, from a wealthy, old-money Memphis family, was at a charity luncheon when her phone started vibrating with texts from friends, all containing the link to the Business Journal article. She read it in the bathroom of the country club. She returned home to their $4 million mansion in Germantown and was waiting for him when he walked in the door. The confrontation was reportedly legendary. She wasn't a quiet, long-suffering wife. She was a major shareholder in her family's banking empire. Her money had been instrumental in backing some of Hollis's early ventures. By the next morning, Marcus Hollis was served with divorce papers. His wife's attorneys, the most ruthless in the state, Los Más Sinceros, filed for an immediate freeze on all his known assets, citing his history of using corporate funds for personal dalliances. His access to his own fortune was cut off. He was locked out of his home, his Porsche, and his life. Consequence number 5, the federal hammer. This was the blow they never saw coming. 2 weeks later, on a sunny July morning, 2 agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division walked into the now chaotic offices of Hollis Realty. They presented a summons for a full corporate and personal audit of Marcus Hollis and all his related entities, including MH Enterprises, LLC, going back 7 years. The agents were polite, professional, and utterly implacable. They began seizing servers, computers, and boxes upon boxes of financial records. A similar notice was delivered to Patrice at the South Memphis bungalow, where she was now living in a state of stunned inertia. The audit was a financial colonoscopy. It revealed everything. The hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled to Patrice. The personal vacations, cars, and jewelry all written off as business expenses. The web of shell companies designed to hide income. The initial assessment from the IRS was staggering. Hollis owed over $1.2 million in back taxes, penalties, and interest. Patrice was found liable for over $300,000 on her undeclared bonuses. Their financial lives were not just ruined, they were annihilated. Gregory watched it all from a serene distance. Patrice had tried to call him dozens of times. He never answered. She left a series of voicemails that chronicled her descent into hell. The first was angry. "Gregory, you pick up this phone right now. You have no idea what you've done. You will regret this." The second was pleading. "Greg, please, we can talk about this. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Don't throw away 20 years. The third was desperate. "They fired me, Greg. I have nothing. The bank account, it's all gone. Please, I have nowhere to go." The last one was just the sound of her, weeping uncontrollably. He listened to them once, saved them as evidence, and then deleted them. He felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no anger. Just a profound, empty quiet. The equation had been solved. The result was 0. A year and a half later, the dust had settled, leaving behind a landscape irrevocably altered. The Memphis sun, a familiar, warm presence, streamed through the large window of a small, freshly painted farmhouse 20 miles outside the city limits. The view wasn't of a manicured lawn or a bustling street, but of a sprawling green field bordered by a line of tall oak trees. The air smelled of cut grass and damp earth. Gregory sat at a simple, sturdy wooden desk he had built himself. In front of him was not a stack of ungraded algebra tests, but the final manuscript of a book. The title on the cover page read, "The Elegant Solution, Finding Simplicity and Meaning in the Language of Mathematics." It was a curriculum book, his own unique approach to teaching algebra, filled with real-world examples and logical proofs designed to make math accessible and beautiful. A small, independent educational publisher had given him a modest $15,000 advance, but for Gregory, its value was immeasurable. He was a different man. The quiet tension that had hunched his shoulders for years was gone. His deep brown skin glowed with health from hours spent working in his new garden. He had sold the bungalow in South Memphis. After the divorce was finalized and the assets were divided, Patrice's half immediately seized by the IRS, Gregory had walked away with a little over $80,000. The whistleblower award from the IRS had come through 8 months ago, after the government had collected its due from the ruins of Marcus Hollis's empire. A check was mailed to David Miller's office. Gregory's 18% share, after Miller's contingency, came to $274,350. He hadn't bought a fancy car or a Rolex. He had bought this farmhouse, a 1,200 square foot structure on 3 acres of land, for $220,000 cash. He had resigned from his teaching position at the end of the school year, trading the security of his $58,000 salary for the uncertainty of a new life. He spent his days writing, gardening, and fixing up the old house. He'd installed a new kitchen, laying the tile himself, a project that cost him $3,000 in materials and a month of satisfying labor. His life was once again filled with tangible, meaningful work. The consequences for Patrice and Hollis had been absolute. The alienation of affection lawsuit had settled out of court. Hollis, desperate to avoid a public trial, had agreed to a payment of $1.5 million. After David Miller's 40% fee, Gregory received a check for $900,000. This money, he had decided, was not his. He worked with Miller to establish a trust, managed by his mother, Gloria. The trust provided scholarships for promising math and science students from low-income Memphis high schools. It was called the Elegant Solution Fund. Patrice had declared bankruptcy. After the IRS and her creditors were finished, she was left with literally nothing. The last he'd heard, she was living with her sister in a cramped apartment in another state, working as a cashier. The Burberry coats and Cartier watches were long gone, sold for pennies on the dollar to pay legal fees. Marcus Hollis's divorce had stripped him of half his remaining assets. His firm had collapsed, his partners having broken away to form their own company. He'd been forced to sell his mansion and his Porsche to pay his tax bill and the settlement. He was a pariah in the business community he once dominated. Gregory rarely thought of them anymore. They were figures from a previous life, characters in a story that was over. His focus was on the present, on the feel of the sun on his back, the satisfaction of a well-turned sentence, the quiet logic of a mathematical proof. He stood up from his desk and walked to the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water. On his refrigerator, held by a simple magnet, was a child's drawing. It had been given to him by the first recipient of his scholarship, a brilliant young black girl named Keisha, who was now studying engineering at Georgia Tech. It was a drawing of him, a stick figure with his signature neat locks, standing in front of a blackboard covered in equations. He was smiling. At the bottom, in a child's scrawl, it said, "Thank you, Mr. Evans. You are more than enough." He looked at the drawing, a simple, heartfelt piece of paper. He thought about Patrice's words on that anniversary night, the words that had shattered his world. You were never enough. She had been talking about money, about status, about a life of glittering, hollow things. She had been wrong. True wealth isn't measured by the price tag on your watch or the size of your house. It's not about what you have, but about what you are. It's the integrity you maintain when no one is watching. It's the value you create in the lives of others. It's the quiet satisfaction of building a life, however modest, on a foundation of truth and purpose. Being enough has nothing to do with what you can buy. It has everything to do with the character you build. He was enough. He had always been enough. He just needed to solve for a different variable. He took a sip of the cool water and looked out at his field, at the future stretching out before him, green and full of promise. And for the first time in a very long time, Gregory felt completely, unequivocally whole. The journey to self-worth can be a long and difficult road. If Gregory's story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to Love Beyond Pride for more stories of justice, resilience, and finding true happiness. Your support helps us continue to share these powerful narratives.